So, what if the moon isn't some distant rock floating way out there in space? What if it's actually much, much closer, and everything we've ever been told about space travel is just one big, elaborate lie? Today, we're going to dive into a theory that asks us to question, well, pretty much everything. This one question right here is the launchpad for this entire theory. The source material we're looking at basically argues that the official story of the moon, its distance, what it's made of, how we got there, is fundamentally wrong. And look, the source doesn't beat around the bush. The statement is pretty much the opening shot. It's a direct challenge to established science, and it really sets the stage for a pretty radical alternative. Okay, so the whole foundation of this theory, it all comes down to one really wild idea, that there's a physical, impenetrable barrier high up in our atmosphere. The source even suggests it could be a kind of firmament. So where does this idea even come from? Well, the source points to these experiments done by the European Southern Observatory as potential evidence. In these experiments, they shot these incredibly powerful lasers up into the sky, and they seem to just stop at a very specific layer. And get this, they even have a specific altitude pinned down, somewhere between 90 and 110 kilometers up. The claim here isn't just that this is some layer of sodium atoms, it's that this is a hard boundary, a ceiling that nothing can get through. Now, to back up this idea of a barrier in the sky, the theory actually points down, way down. It brings up this weird phenomenon in the deep ocean, a super salty lake on the seafloor that's so dense, a submarine apparently just bounced right off its surface.
So how do you connect a lake at the bottom of the ocean to a barrier in the sky? Well, the speaker uses this old saying, as above, so below, to argue that, hey, if this kind of impenetrable barrier can exist way down in the ocean, it's totally logical to think a similar one exists way up in the sky.
All right, so if you accept that there's this giant, impenetrable barrier up there, well, then that means you can't get past it. And that leads to the next big claim. The Apollo missions had to be a hoax. They couldn't have gone to the moon if they couldn't even leave our atmosphere. But that raises a huge question, right? If they were just stuck in low Earth orbit, how on earth did they fake those incredible views of a tiny, distant Earth floating in space? The source claims to have the answer and says it's right there in what they call raw, unedited footage from Apollo 11. According to the source, it was all done with something called the window trick. It's basically a four-step process. By killing the lights inside the ship and setting the camera way back from a round window, they can make that window frame look like the outline of the entire planet. And this is where it gets really interesting. The source plays this audio from Neil Armstrong, stating they're about halfway to the moon. The claim is that he said this while they were actually in low Earth orbit, pulling off this very window trick. And it doesn't stop there. The argument is then backed up with a whole list of other supposed red flags. Things like the astronaut stories about seeing stars changing over time, or the fact they didn't bring a high-powered telescope. These are all presented as pieces of a puzzle that just don't fit the official story. So, if we can't get to the moon, and it's not where they say it is, that begs the question, what is the moon really? This is where the theory gets into what the moon's true nature might be. This is where the theory takes a huge turn from mainstream science. We're all taught the moon reflects sunlight, right? Well, this theory says, nope, that's wrong. The moon actually makes its own light. The sun doesn't shine on it, it charges it, kind of like a giant floating battery. And they take that battery idea and run with it. It's how they explain the phases of the moon. A full moon, that's just a fully charged battery. A crescent moon or a new moon, that's the battery running down, waiting for the sun to recharge it again. So the big question is, if the moon is inside this barrier, just how close are we talking? The source doesn't give an exact number, but the claim is that it's way, way closer than we're told. Maybe not even 1,000 miles away. And to back this up, they use this anecdote. It's kind of like a common sense argument. The point is, if you can see craters on the moon with a cheap pair of binoculars, it just doesn't feel like it could be 250,000 miles away. That personal observation, they argue, clashes with the official numbers. Okay, so the theory isn't just about lasers and camera tricks. It actually wraps up on a much more philosophical note. It tries to answer why. Why would a secret this huge be kept from all of us? And to make this point, the source brings up a really curious quote from Neil Armstrong himself on the 25th anniversary of the moon landing.
The theory interprets this not as some inspirational speech, but as a kind of coded message, a hint that the real truth is buried under layers of protection. And that all leads to the final big idea, summed up by this Winston Churchill quote. The argument is that if a truth is big enough, say as big as a physical barrier around our world, it would need an equally massive bodyguard of lies, like the entire Apollo program, to keep it a secret. And that's really the final thought this theory leaves us with. It poses a final, provocative question. It's not just asking us to believe the theory, but to ask ourselves, what is the real truth, and who are the bodyguards protecting it?